What's up, my friends? You guys know me. I'm Beto Gudiño, and I bring you top God thinkers to explore life's biggest questions through the lens of belief. And because you can never trust what's on the internet, we make it more complicated by splitting it into 5 emojis that range from blasphemous to divine. So, did you know the Arctic is farting methane gases? Well, it's time to find out what's going on today. We're going to save the Earth. We're going to be talking with Katey Walter Anthony. So, Katey, welcome to Christian Podcast. How you doing today?
Hello, how are you?
This one I'm going to do at the beginning. First, I want to get to know you a little bit. So would you mind telling me a little bit of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I am a scientist and a wife and a mother. I have 2 boys and we homeschool them and involve them a lot in our life, both in the scientific research I do, and my husband is a farmer. So we travel a lot between Alaska and Siberia. I used to travel a lot between Alaska and Siberia. Now we travel between our farm in Minnesota and our Arctic research sites in Alaska. And I try to spend as much time outdoors as possible. And I read my Bible every day.
What was the last one you said?
I said, and I read my Bible every day.
You read okay. Love it. Okay. So we're out for a good conversation today. So this is what I'm going to do. At the beginning of the show, I have your book right here in my hands called Chasing Lakes, Love, Science, and the Secrets of the Arctic. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do an emoji reaction to the book, and then we're just going to find out how do you react to my reaction to the book. So are you up for that?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. So emoji tombola. Okay, the emoji tombola is running. And it's a divine emoji reaction. Divine emoji reaction. Coming back to faith and saving the planet. That's my takeaway. But let's go back to Katey. How do you feel about getting the divine emoji reaction to the book?
Well, it makes me wonder how the whole thing actually works.
Okay, I love that. All right, Katey. Well, I mean, I was reading your book, and it's an epic story. I think you have an amazing journey, and I love that you said you introduced yourself as a scientist. So I'm not a scientist, so I don't know a whole lot about what's going on in the Arctic. I've never been to the Arctic, so I'm super curious to know a little bit more about that. But I mean, even the picture of it, right? This is super exciting to see. I mean, I don't know if it's you right here on the picture, but I imagine it's you exploring in the Arctic.
Yeah.
So I have like 3 questions that are hailing from my own kids that I thought, okay, this is going to be a little bit of the topic I want to discuss today, which is kind of like when we are little and we're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? And I feel like you have a lot of that in this book and in your own story that I want to inspire even families that will be listening or kids in the future, that they can be inspired to pursue their dreams and goals and passions in life. But we'll start with kids' questions. So are you up for that?
Yes.
We'll make it fun and easy going at the beginning. So here we go. What is the deepest snow you've ever seen?
The deepest snow I've ever seen. It was actually not in the Arctic. It was in the Sierra Nevada mountains. I think where there because it snows so much, the roofs are very steep so that the snow will fall off and the roofs won't cave in. So I remember as a child seeing that their people actually had to dig a tunnel to get out their front door. That said, I have also lived in a fishing village on the coast of Alaska. And there it snowed close to 5 feet in one night. So that was very dramatic. And the next day then it started raining. And so all of this many feet of snow started moving and gliding downhill like a 7-Eleven Slurpee back into the ocean. So that was the water cycle in its dynamic.
Wow. Okay. So you say about 5 feet?
I would say 5 feet sort of in one big snowfall event.
Wow.
But I didn't measure it in the Sierra Nevada mountains. I just recognized for people to get in and out of their doors, they had to actually shovel tunnels after a big snowstorm. So that was probably the thickest, but I wasn't a scientist at the time. Actually, it was all relative.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Love it. Okay. What is your favorite thing that you've seen in your lifetime?
My baby born, I would say.
Okay, that's beautiful. I mean, you have 2 kids, right?
I have 2 sons.
Two sons.
So, but that first one, the first time, it's always a miracle. But that first time was special.
I love it. Yeah, I have 3 kids, and for sure, like I can go back to the first day right there in the hospital. It's epic. I even brought my guitar out, and I was singing a few songs, as the baby was popping out. Okay, one more. What was the highest and the lowest temperature you've ever been in?
Well, the highest was probably, these are going to be different units because of where I was. The highest was in probably Nevada, where my family lives, my extended relatives. And it was maybe 110, 115. And then the coldest I've been in is somewhere between -50 and -60. And that was in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Wow. So that's Fahrenheit?
Well, once you get down about -40, Celsius and Fahrenheit are similar to each other.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When you go more negative, I don't remember which one, but once you get to -40, it's all pretty cold.
Super cold. Okay. Yeah. That's
Celsius. Yeah.
That sounds pretty bad. Okay. What would be, this is just my question, out of curiosity. Like, what is the element, like if you bring an element into that type of weather, would it freeze automatically? Like, is that real? Would that be like in the movies you see, that sometimes you bring something out into the super cold and it's like instantly freeze or frozen? Is that true or no?
I mean, you hear of people throwing hot water in the air and it turns to ice before it falls. I've actually never done that experiment.
That would be a great YouTube video.
I wouldn't say instantly, but pretty fast.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Katey, thank you so much. That's amazing. And, as I was reading your book, I think there's a passion that you have for lakes, for sure, right? I mean, that's chasing lakes, but also almost like an awareness and like a spiritual awakening that you've had in your own story. So I would love to dig in a little bit on both elements, on the scientific side of your pursuit as a academic person who loves and had a passion for a specific subject, and you pursued your career in that, but also, the element of you that brought you back to God, that at the time in your life you maybe were an atheist and things like that. So I feel like those 2 topics are like so relevant, and I don't know if there's a way to tackle both of them at the same time as we kind of like talk about your journey, or if you feel like, I want to talk about one first and then the other first, or you think they're connected. What would you say?
Well, I think they're connected by truth in that for a long period of time, I was living as if there was no God, an atheist, however you want to call it. And as I pursued science in that time, I felt that something in me was lacking. So I loved uncovering, and I still do, the mysteries of Earth and how it works. I study methane gas bubbles in lakes, and I just wish I had your glasses or some sort of that would help me to look down into the sediments and see exactly where these bubbles are coming from. I can measure things, and I can increase my knowledge and maybe teach other people some things from my measurements, but my knowledge is still imperfect. So but yet, even though I don't understand it in full, I believe that truth still exists. God still knows what's going on in those sediments, even if I don't. So I think both the spiritual side of me as well as the scientific side of me both desire to know more and do truth. And a lot of times that means laying down your own ego.
Wow.
And yourself. So.
Oof. Laying down your own ego. I love that. And the pursuit of truth. Okay, so let's start right there. The pursuit of truth, I think that's going to be kind of like the chasing lakes and chasing relationships in your own story. So let's go back to that question that kids are asked when they are little, because I even, I grew up in Mexico, and I remember like being in elementary school, and being asked that question. And I always would say, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a firefighter. Those are like the typical, right? I never said a doctor or anything like that. But I think astronaut was for me like, that's what I want to do, So now I look at people like Elon Musk. I'm like, oh, okay, he's living my dream, right, in a sense. But okay, so let's go back to when you were younger. What inspired you about science and about maybe the world and the natural world, that as a little girl you said, I wish when I'm older I can be a scientist in this area? Like, how was that? Like, can you bring us back to your childhood passion?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my childhood, I'm the oldest of 4 girls, and my parents married young, and we moved a lot. We lived in, on average, a different home more than once a year. So it was an unstable childhood. We were very poor. We lived in a trailer, an orphanage building, back bedrooms of other people's houses. My parents were married and divorced from each other twice. And for me, an escape was nature, getting out to lakes, getting in mountains. I just felt a lot of peace there, sort of an escape from maybe the pains and anxieties of what a lot of kids experience. I think it was just spending time in nature, hiking with my father and grandfather, where I started. The more you spend time with a person or an environment, you can't help but develop a relationship. And in that, you want to know this thing more. And so I was looking at the plants and the rocks and the animals, and my dad would ask me questions, or I started to ask my own. So I think just spending time there is where it was born. And then there was a sort of ecstasy associated with escaping cities and being out in nature. And so I really wanted that in my future. And I remember asking my dad, can I just stay at this lake up in the mountains and be here forever and maybe do it as a career? And he said, don't turn what you love into a career, because it'll take the enjoyment out of it. And I almost listened to that. And wow. I thought maybe I'll become a doctor because they earn a lot of money, and I really wanted to get out of poverty. But as I grew older, you also have to really learn who you are. And along the way, I decided, money is not really what I want to go after. I want to go after a place I enjoy. And that turned out to be lakes. It turned out to be the wilderness. And so I wanted to be an explorer that was both escaping, but being in that serenity of the beautiful wilderness and nature. And then I got that partway along, and that wasn't enough. So I needed to, that's when I really started becoming more of a scientist, learning why do these lakes matter? Sure, I can be here. I could paint them. I could just enjoy their presence, but that wasn't enough too. I needed to find out, why are they important? What's going on with them? How do they relate to the rest of the earth? And that's when I started doing research, making measurements, asking questions, finding out there's so much we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is epic. And so let's pair that a little bit with, you were on a search, and, I was reading that you were in Russia, and then you had like a teen love. And so, I mean, the story is epic, it's so interesting. But as it relates to maybe the getting away from God, or the running away from God part, there's a phrase in the book that you said that your dad mentioned, and you just mentioned your dad, kind of like helping you discover nature, but on the other end, almost like, well, this is the phrase he used. He said, girls, Christianity is a fairy tale. And, so I think after that, it was almost like you started turning your back on God and saying, okay, can I have like my own experience in this life? And so how was that, like that, maybe influence from your dad have a say in how you ended up behaving, for maybe for a season of your life, maybe your teen years, your younger years. So tell me a little bit about that losing your faith as you were growing up.
Yeah, I think our parents have a huge impact on us and what we think. And especially our fathers, if we respect them, we listen to what they say. So having my father tell me that Christianity was a fairy tale and ridicule the idea that I would believe in it, it raised a lot of doubts in my mind. And you can't feel and touch and see God. Mm-hmm. You're believing in this thing. And we live in a world that increasingly looks down on faith and puts things like science or things we can observe more on a pedestal. So I would say the world was against me having faith. My own father was against me having faith. I didn't know. I didn't know what was right or true. And I got tired of that. I got tired of the ambiguity and the uncertainty and the doubt. And so I wasn't a scientist yet, but I think naturally I said, well, I'm going to do an experiment. I am going to live like there's no God. And tried to do that for a long time. And got into trouble. I got into trouble that hurt me and hurt other people, and it did not leave me a lot of peace. So even as I started to grow scientifically and was having successes that I would have dreamed about as a young person having, they were taking place. I was discovering things in science, getting recognized for it. I had wonderful friendships, but none of those filled something in my heart. And it was this desire to really, truly be loved. And there was a time I lived in a cabin alone in Alaska. And there was a time when, I just had been reading my Bible, and I'd go to church sometimes, but not stand in the back and leave before it was over, because I didn't want anyone to talk to me or try and keep me there or anything like that. But God slowly started really revealing himself and told me that he loved me, and in a way that I understood. I'd never known that before. And that really filled up a hole in my life that gave me peace, so that I wasn't looking for that anywhere else in the world. And I think that freed me. I was able then to enjoy the science I was doing, enjoy my father, appreciate him and his shortcomings, as well as all the other relationships I was in. So I think finding God that way filled up something that was missing and freed me to go forward whole.
Wow. Okay, so you were saying that you got into trouble in those times, so if I kind of pair that a little bit with what you said at the beginning, that the difference in your discovery is truth. So what were some of the elements that were untrue in your life that, caused trouble? Can you pinpoint to a few of them?
Well, I mean, the number one thing is that I'd moved out of home when I was 13, and then went off to Russia, which was just freshly broken up Soviet Union in 1992. And I'd come from a very poor background. So I earned money and I saved every bit of it, and I was afraid to spend any, and I didn't know where my next underwear or pair of shoes was ever going to come from. So I was scared, I would say, to survive. I felt like it was somewhat upon me to survive in this world. And I learned that I could, that I needed other people to help me. And so I would say I got into manipulative relationships. I had never developed fully emotionally. So I didn't have a healthy sense of self. And I also didn't necessarily I treated other people wrong in the relationships I was in.
Okay.
I didn't get involved with drugs and alcohol, experiment a little bit with that, like most people do, but it was more just being self-centered. And I could justify it as a need to survive, but that was still wrong.
Wow. Okay. That is epic, because I feel like at the end, I want to talk about the family relationship you have now, but anyways, we'll discover that. So let's talk about maybe the influential people that were around you. So you're a scientist, and when I think of science right now, like you were saying, it's almost like, I guess the question would be, how do you leave out the tension between people who pursue science but without faith, and maybe even cling to science as a way to reject faith? And on the opposite end, I mean, people who pursue science and pursue God and see God even in the natural world. So how have people influenced that? I think in the book you talk about a little bit about professors that said, I'm an atheist, and professors that said, no, I'm a believer. So how does that play a role in shaping your faith as you're growing up too, in becoming a scientist?
Well, as I was getting my graduate degree, that was where especially my PhD, not during my master's, but that was where I started to let God back in. And I wanted more than anything to be a successful scientist. And I was worried because there weren't very many examples of believers or Christians who were scientists. I would say the vast majority were not, at least as far as I knew. So I was concerned that I couldn't have both. But I guess because that hole in me had been filled up by God, I also couldn't turn my back on that. And that's where I was saying, who am I serving? Am I serving myself in my career, or am I serving truth? And to answer truth, I said, then I'm going to put whatever that risks. So for many years, it kind of depends on what you study. I study methane bubbles and lakes and permafrost thaw. There's not a lot of conflict with God there. I'm not studying the evolution of where the earth came from or the evolution of life. And I think that would be more challenging. I'd have to take on some of these questions that no one has answers to. We might think we do, but no one does. So my faith initially was in parallel to my scientific pursuit. And there were a few people along the way. I didn't actually ever really know them or have in-depth conversations with them that were scientists and people of faith. But just knowing that they existed for me was helpful to know, well, maybe that can exist in me too.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So people, maybe people that, it's so interesting because I almost feel like there's an element of maybe even social contagion when it comes to belief. Right. And for the good or for the bad, the more people that don't believe, the more even it feels like we're in a society that's desperate, that it's lacking, that it's chasing after the wind. And the opposite happens too. The more you see hope, the more you witness people who, offer you a smile when their circumstances are hard, and you realize, okay, how can they do that? And you realize, well, there's something deeper. There's a faith element. And that's also
actually you just hit on something that I know that in Russia. So in 1992, when I was living in southern Russia, almost everybody I came across for a long time, life was hard. They were standing in line for food. Their money was worth less and less every day. Crime was rampant. They were not happy. You did not see smiles on people's faces. They outwardly showed misery. And then I saw a group of people that were different. They were smiling. Their faces were bright. They didn't have all their teeth and they weren't wealthy, but they had something different. And that was when I actually asked them, what is this? And they were, I think, Baptist Christians or something.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that doesn't look like Christianity I'd seen in the United States. So they had something in them that was glowing. And wow. I never forgot.
What do you think was if that was striking to you, what do you think was what you were witnessing in America that you were able to say, okay, that's not at all what we're living here in America? Were there a few elements
I don't want to judge other people. that if I shared my honest opinion, it would come across as judgment. But I don't think we've endured hardships. People that call themselves Christians in our country, so none of us have endured the type of hardships that puts our faith to the test. And, the more sacrifice you make for something, whether it's your child or whatever it is you're serving, the more you care and love that and the more life it takes on. So I think that the Russians, maybe it was the contrast between the darkness of their surroundings and their environment and then the light of their faith.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's epic. Okay, so this is why I feel like your story is so interesting, because as you are exploring the Arctic, you're exploring, like pursuing lakes, like you are finding out about methane gases. You're also discovering your own journey of faith. So I feel like you cannot separate one from the other. So can you tell me a little bit about so I feel like you are trying to save the world, right? As a little girl, maybe, well, you're trying to discover something that is helpful for humanity, right? I think in your research, becoming a PhD, like pursuing a career very specific, really your passion, like people who become doctors is because they want to save lives, right? I don't know, Elon Musk, he wants to explore Mars, right? So as I think of that, it's always because there's a desire to do good. There's a desire to almost like pass on a legacy to humanity. But it almost seems like the more you were trying to pursue that, the more you were, like you said, maybe becoming self-centered. You even said like you started to become like Babylon. Like, could you explain a little bit like what does Babylon have to do with becoming like self-centered or egotistical?
Well, Babylon was a city and also symbolic in the Bible of this beautiful woman who got everything she wanted and was in command and just success as the world sees it. Not that I was claiming to be beautiful or the most successful, but compared to where I had come from, that was the ladder that I was climbing. And I was convicted that is wrong and that I needed humility. And yeah, I guess, when you eat healthy food, you feel good. And when you eat junk food, you feel crappy. And same thing, if we think certain thoughts or we start chasing after the wrong self-centered motives, that doesn't make anybody feel good. It's a perpetuating really negative feeling. So I think I had read the Bible and was convicted that I was, again, wrong and needed to have a different attitude. And
okay, so if I think of, like the very specific pursuit of that passion, becoming egotistical, but also like Babylon, you said, but also in a sense, like you could have, like you said, maybe justified it by say, well, this is a good pursuit, right? Like I'm doing something good for the planet. I'm doing something good for the earth. I'm doing something good for, for science and scientific knowledge. So if we take a look at that, like, would you say there was necessarily like anything inherently bad about that dream or that pursuit?
Well, I guess I'd have to ask myself, was I honestly trying to save the world? That's a really big thing to claim to be trying to do. And I would say something maybe egotistical thing to claim. I wanted to study lakes because I loved being there and I wanted to understand why they were important and how the earth worked. And I wanted to get a job and make it as a scientist, make a name for myself. So those things are all natural and human, but can't carried too far, but can become self-centered. A lot of what we do as scientists to get funded, we put it in certain contexts. If I were to write to the National Science Foundation and say, give me $1 million so that I can understand better exactly the little pathways that bubbles take through the sediments, I wouldn't get funded. But when I can explain the importance of these bubbles in a global warming context, now it's relevant to society and you get funded. So there's intrinsic curiosity of how things work, I would say, has always been the biggest driver. And part of it is I didn't understand in the beginning the big picture importance of these lakes. I believed something existed, otherwise why would there be so many? But it really came later when I could see the system as a whole, and I could see that the Arctic was warming and more of these lakes were forming, and where they were belching out this methane gas. And then that logically, you start to understand, wow, more warming and melting of the Arctic leads to more methane gas, which leads to more warming, and you have this positive feedback cycle. That was an interesting discovery. And that methane, when it goes in the atmosphere, it goes around the whole world. So it does affect all people.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It truly does. And it's so interesting because I think this is where we get maybe into even like the politics of climate change and all of that. And I was thinking of this phrase. I don't know if you may agree or may disagree, but what do you think of this? Money follows fear.
Well, probably so. I really don't like agenda-driven science, but I think that there's something in that. I've noticed in the science I do, many times what we have discovered is something related to climate warming, but we've also discovered things related to climate cooling. So if one of these lakes sits out there on the landscape long enough, it switches from causing climate warming to actually taking on a good role and soaking carbon up out of the atmosphere and leading to climate cooling. So the media and political response to those scientific findings has been very different. The global warming part gets all kinds of attention and the climate cooling part a lot less. And so I find that that's to me frustrating because as a scientist, I don't want to only try and discover things that I know are going to feed people's fears and follow a certain political agenda. I want to understand really how the whole system works. And I think we owe that to people in the world if we're going to do science is to pursue the truth.
Wow. Okay, that's so loable of you, and I love your honesty in saying that. Even saying there's a whole other side that people don't pay much attention to because maybe it's not as fearful, right, as like maybe apocalyptic as the other side. But I appreciate that. You saying that coming from an expert, I would say, in the topic. That's super helpful. And okay, so what would you say? I mean, let's dig in a little bit into this because I'm unfamiliar with the Arctic because I've never been there. But what would you say is the most imminent threat to methane gases bursting out in lakes in the Arctic in our planet?
Well, it really is warming. The Earth is warming and the Arctic is warming 3 times faster. And when it does, if you can imagine, like if you had a sharp stick or a needle or a knife and you stuck it into the ground, if you were not in the Arctic, it would go as far as you can push it. But in the Arctic, it doesn't go very far before it hits something really hard. And that hard thing is frozen soil, permafrost. And in the frozen soil, there's massive blocks of ice. So as the Arctic is warming, that ground is thawing out, the ice is melting, and the ground collapses. You get these wet, mucky sinkholes, and then that's the environment where the methane is coming. So the only way to stop that is to, if we can, slow climate warming. Otherwise, it's inevitable that when you put an ice cube outside, it's going to melt. You increase the surrounding air temperature, it causes the ice cube to melt. And that's the same thing in the Arctic. If you increase the air temperature, the ground ice melts, the massive ice sheets melt, the glaciers melt, and then all that water goes into the ocean. It goes into it just enters the whole water cycle and changes weather patterns. So even though most people are far away from the Arctic, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It ends up affecting the whole Earth.
That's true. So I was working in a long time ago, like 16 years ago, here in California, in a construction right next to the water. Okay, and I remember as they building the wall that's next to the water, they were saying, we got to build it like 3 feet higher than the regular house because of the rising sea levels, right? So back in the days, I was already curious, like, wow, this guy's building his house higher because, basically there's more water in the ocean, or they're thinking in the future there's going to be. So is that necessarily bad, or is that causing a problem in the world, that, rising sea levels, other than, maybe build all your houses higher, or or is there a bigger problem to that?
I am not an expert on all of the down the line problems that are going to come. Obviously there's major expenses. And a lot of time, major expenses with cities and islands where people live flooding, and all those people have to relocate. So it's not always just building their house higher. In the Arctic, there are indigenous communities that live along the coast, but because there's less sea ice protecting the waves, you get stronger storms, which is causing the coast where they live to erode. So now you have to move whole villages. So there's expense associated with that. And so I think that, these things we definitely need to think about them. But it's also, I think, another healthy frame of mind is that the world has always been changing. We can't try to keep the Earth from changing. It always has. The Arctic we have today is the product of all the changes that have happened in the past, including past warming. So what I think as humans, we have a responsibility to take care of the place we live and take care of each other. And to do that, we need wisdom. And wisdom comes from data, collecting data, understanding how things work so that we can make good management decisions.
Mm-hmm. So what would be maybe like 2, 3 like wisdom nuggets that you would say this is something we can do collectively to, like, for example, I mean, I kept referring like Elon Musk, right? So I think of, electric cars are great because they don't produce carbon in our air, but at the same time now they're saying but they're producing like all these cells that have all kinds of chemicals and whatnot, and at the end they're going to end up wasting our land and this and that. So I mean, is that a solution that you see, or do you feel like there's other ways in which we collectively can say this is how we can care for our planet?
Well, it seems like we've become such a consumer society and we generate so much garbage that wasn't even there 50 years ago. So actually finding pristine nature on Earth, on the planet, is hard now.
Wow.
So I would say trying to simplify our life, use less resources, rather than signing up for organizations that take you places, fill up your schedule so that you're stressed out. Cut more of that out. Spend time with your children, spend time with your neighbors, take walks, redevelop relationships with people and with nature. Even if you live in a city, there's still natural things that you can go out and observe every day and see the beauty in it. So I think slowing down, simplifying, using less resources, and taking time to care for people and any of the resources that you have decisions about could go a long way. And that's individuals taking responsibility, not necessarily from the top down being told what to do.
Wow, that's so helpful. And I love that. And would you say, doing things like, I don't know, I mean, I'm just kind of like curious. Would you say things like recycling, not using straws in your drinks? Like, is that really helpful, do you think? Or I mean, does that have anything to do?
You and I in some ways know as much as each other about the solutions to these things. But yeah, the plastic bags, the plastic bottles, so drink water from your faucet instead of going and buying all this bottles that get produced in the millions every day and end up in the ocean. I think just go back, make decisions to, as much as you can, use less manufactured resources.
Okay, I love that. Less manufactured resources. And I witnessed that here in California. I mean, I'm right by the ocean. And when we go and then I see trash, it saddens me. Sometimes I pick it up, but sometimes there's so much that I'm like, okay, this is going to end up in the ocean. This is plastic, right? And I feel like this is bad. And I think that's something as simple as next time I come, instead of bringing my water bottle, like plastic water bottle that I bought for $1, I'm just going to bring a jug that I can refill in my house. So something simple like that, right?
Yes, I think things like that is great. There is a place for science and technology. We've created all this garbage. Is recycling the solution? My understanding is that a lot of what goes into the recycling actually gets shipped to China and incinerated because our EPA doesn't allow us to burn it in our country because it creates bad air, but yet we ship it off to China. So a lot of people think they're recycling, but the fate of it is not recycling. The fate of it is to go into an incinerator in China, and then it comes back in the atmosphere to us.
Wow.
So I think any kind of research we can do to improve our ability to recycle, but then also someone else is getting rich by the convenience of producing plastic and getting people addicted to it. So if there's ways that we can take the bottle and reuse it, as you said, to drink your water, those sorts of decisions, not give economic incentive to people to keep hurting the planet.
Wow.
Looking for alternative energy.
Okay.
There's all kinds of things that we could do it larger scales too.
Yes, that's so helpful. So I think of even explaining to my kids, I love what you just said. You know, we are addicted to plastic. I mean, what a better way to put it. That's so true. And that almost like, oh, I feel like I resonate with that. And I feel like, okay, if I'm aware that I'm addicted to plastic, then I can have a better understanding of how I'm interacting myself with stuff, right? With like plastics and stuff, and be conscious. I mean, just to be aware and be conscious, I think it's helpful to start reducing our consumption of those things, right? And then hopefully change like corporately and corporate policies or whatever. I think that would be awesome. Okay, so all of that is amazing. All of that, like the science behind helping our planet, the science behind caring collectively. And let's bring it down to like your personal story, okay? Because you're traveling the world, you're like in Russia, you're like doing these experiments, and then you had your teenage love. I think his name was Valera, right?
Yep. Yep.
Valera, and then so it seems like you had a passion to say, I want to form a family as one of your goals in life too, so you have this research passion, but you also have like, I want to become a mother one day, maybe, right? Like a wife. So that's a dream too, that I feel like you had like so entangled with the chasing lakes. And eventually I feel like you were almost like wondering, okay, will I ever meet the guy that, I can marry and be, spend the rest of my life. So tell me a little bit about how you met Peter and how that almost like deviated you from your chasing lake passion, and then you started on a complete like different type of passion, but also your own passion, like becoming a mom and a wife.
Well, I met Peter right after I got my dream job, which is a professorship. And so right as I was entering that new job, I'd been single for a while and almost had, earlier I had wanted to get married, but at this point my career was so exciting that looking for a husband was not at the top of my list. And then I walked into a wedding that I was crashing the wedding, and the best man caught my eye. And it turned out that I sat by him at the dinner, and they say you'll know when you meet the one. And I knew, I had a sense. And the more he asked me questions and the more I learned about him, I realized I would be foolish to let my weaknesses and ways that I stumble get in the way of taking this somewhere. For me, one of the biggest stumbling blocks was that he was and still is a Minnesota farmer. And he's the only child of a large family farm. So here I was in the Arctic, completely committed to it, loving Russia, loving the whole Arctic, and never wanting to leave. And then I meet a man a farmer can't just leave his farm. So there was an apparent conflict there that for a long time I didn't know how to resolve. And we ended up getting married and splitting our time back and forth. But it's always been a concern in my mind. For many years, it was a concern in my mind that I was going to have to give up science and be stuck on this farm in Minnesota. It's a beautiful farm. It's absolutely beautiful. But I have never been chained to one place on earth. I've always had the freedom to roam. So that sounded like prison in a way. But I built my own bars of resentment and bitterness and fear of being stuck in this place that was making me unhappy and him unhappy. And I could see that he and his parents loved that farm and they wanted me to, but I was not going to let myself because I hadn't chosen to be there. And so over time, that was a place where God had to really soften me and let me learn to trust him, that he brought Peter into my life. And Peter is an amazing man. I can't imagine ever being happier and more in awe and respect of the husband that I married. Peter is just fantastic. But he came with his farm in Minnesota. So God really had to, again, just make me trust him. He had me here for a reason. And I think a big part of it was to lay down my will that I was going to be the one that defined what made me happy. Because we all have a choice. We can choose to be unhappy or not. And so it was laying down my pride, and saying, all right, I am willing to let joy in. That's a joy that's not from me. I didn't come up with it. I didn't choose it. And I'm going to lay down my resentment. And when that finally happened, it's amazing. I was free. Those prison bars were gone. And I can enjoy the Minnesota farm. And luckily, we still go now as a family to Alaska. So I haven't been completely stuck in one spot forever.
Yeah.
When it happens, I know I can't resent it, because whenever we're bitter, resentment, we're putting our own bars up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's so helpful, because a lot of people, I feel like they have their own passion, their own dreams, their own goals. And if I'm thinking, if something I want to pass on to my kids is, yes, pursue your dreams. And if you want to be an astronaut, you can. But also at the same time, there's going to be almost like a realization of, do you want to enjoy the relationships that are right next to you, right? And I don't know if you've seen this movie, but there's a movie called Ad Astra with Brad Pitt. And I love the movie. I was watching it with my kids. And it's an old movie, so I'm not spoiling anything. But it's a movie in which the son is pursuing his father, who's far off in the galaxy trying to find a new planet or something. And then the son finally catches up to him and then realizes, wow, my dad is like pursuing this dream outside in another galaxy, when he could have had me and the most like important relationship all along, right? So it was it's a brokenness, but I also feel like that happens to a lot of people, so I want to give like props to you and in your journey of realizing that God was doing something in your own heart to... Yes,
you said that so well. We do have an opportunity. We don't have to always chase lakes or chase something else. There are things, people and things right there with us that those can be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And you compare it
takes humility.
It does. So you compare that to a thermostat lake? You said you were becoming like what is a thermostat lake?
Well, it's a Thermokarst lake. And a Thermokarst lake is a lake that is there because the ground ice melted. There used to be a block of ice in the ground. The ice melted, the ground sunk, and then it filled with water. And early on when this lake forms, it's greedy. And it holds heat, and it wants to thaw and eat more of the ground around it. It belches out this methane gas. And so that's the picture of me, or a person that's in that self-centered, very often when we're young, stage of life, we can do a lot of damage. But we have so much energy and force. And then as a Thermokarst lake gets older, it uses up all of its permafrost carbon. So it's no longer belching out methane gas. And instead, it becomes a place where plants grow, and carbon in the atmosphere can get soaked up like a sponge into the bottom of this lake, and it grows thick peats. And its impact on the environment is good because it's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere instead of releasing it. And so, people also can change. We might start out on a self-seeking negative trajectory where we're hurting people and the environment, but we can switch. It's not too late to change and do good.
Mm-hmm. So was there a specific circumstance that you think helped you transition from pride to humility?
I recognized that I didn't have joy in my pride. And again, the Bible for me is always this mirror where it points out what's wrong with me. And that God offers a different solution, and that required faith. But that was it. It was recognizing the truth and then not saying no to it, and being courageous enough to not see how I could possibly be joyful by laying down my pride, but just trying it. And it worked.
Wow. That's so beautiful. And I can't help but think of the story of Naaman in the Bible, as you've referred to the Bible a lot. And Naaman is a person who had to get rid of pride by going into the water, and not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 times, but 7 times. And I almost feel like, if 7 is the perfect number, it's almost like this sense of like, if you want to get rid of pride, go as many times as you need to until you remove it. And I feel like that's almost like what happened to you as you're chasing lakes. It's a little bit of that. So I have this phrase right here that you wrote, and it's so beautiful. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how that touches you personally. It says, home is the place where one stays to tend the gardens or landscape of relationships.
Yeah, I think you actually said that. It's recognizing that your children or your husband or your parent, they are like a little plant that wants to grow, and you can affect it negatively. If we have ill feelings and a sour soul, we're going to hurt that thing that wants to grow next to us. Or we can stop thinking about ourselves and instead give and enable the things around us to grow and be beautiful. So I don't always have to chase the lakes. I love those lakes, but there's plenty of important things to do by tending the local garden as well.
Mm-hmm. If you're listening, Elon Musk, there's hope for you, man. Anyways, this is what we're going to do, Katey. We are going to go from blasphemous to divine. So what that looks like is, as we wrap up the episode, we're just going to summarize what we've talked about. So from your vantage point, if we say, what would be the most blasphemous idea you can think of?
That I'm always right.
Okay. I love it. Okay, so the most skeptical idea you can think of.
Well, that I'm wrong, I suppose.
Okay, that makes total sense. Okay, that makes total sense. All right, I love that. Let's go to inspired emoji. So inspired emoji, what gives you hope, or where do you find inspiration?
Well, that truth and love exist, and that we can have those things.
Wow, the truth and love exist. Love it. All right, let's move on to holy. What is the holiest idea you can think of?
The opposite of my own sinful self, so holy is without anything wrong. It's pure, and it's the opposite of what I often am, which is not that.
Okay, love. And finally, the most divine idea you can think of.
Well, I guess that that God loves us so much that he laid his own life down to save ours.
Wow. There you have it, my friends. What an amazing time with Katey, chasing lakes, love, science, and the secrets of the Arctic. So, Katey, where do you want to point people to find out more about maybe your work or your writing, or even to find this book?
Well, the book is being published by HarperCollins, and in the back of the book, if you want to read the actual science and the nitty-gritty of that, then there's lots of references to original work. But this is more just a personal memoir story, so it's in common language.
Love it. All right, Katey, thank you so much for being on the show, my friends. Go to christianpodcast.com to choose your own emoji. Every episode has 5 emojis you get to choose from, so let us know what you think. Do you disagree with us? Go and do a blasphemous emoji. Do you like what we said? Give us an inspired emoji. Do you love what we said? Give us a divine emoji. All right, so thank you so much, Katey. I'll see you guys on the next one.
Thank you.